Hello everybody, welcome to the Student Perspectives podcast. I'm Nathan Bell.
I'm Paddy Quinn.
And today we're going to be interviewing a lecturer to find out his career path and see what possibilities you have when you finish your undergrad.
Today we're joined by an educator, filmmaker and cultural innovator with a career full of fascinating twists, from leading Erasmus programs in Barcelona to debuting feature films at Galway and teaching film across Europe. His journey is as inspiring as it is unique. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Conor Murphy.
Thank you very much, Paddy. Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you for coming on.
Very good to be here. Hello to everyone at home. Interesting. Student perspectives, yeah?
Yeah, that's the idea.
This is a room I teach in 5 days a week, but this is the first time I've had this perspective in this room. So thank you for that.
Quite interesting.
Perspective inception we're having.
Yeah.
So
I thought I'd maybe start with an introduction,
Yeah, go on.
so you can give us a bit about your background.
Okay, Conor Murphy, as charged.
Yep.
Born in Dublin 1965, which makes me very old.
Which part of Dublin were you?
South Dublin, born in Blackrock.
Okay.
Grew up there, went to UCD, graduated from UCD in 1988 with a degree in English and classical civilization.
Okay.
At the time, you couldn't study film in Ireland. There was no such thing at third level. So I was always interested in film. Growing up as a kid, as a teenager, absolutely fascinated with film, and particularly European film. But there was no option for that when I was 18, leaving school. So I did a degree in the humanities, as you do. And at the end of that, I was offered a job in Barcelona, Spain, teaching English at the Trade Fair complex. I'd never been in Spain. I spoke no Spanish, but it seemed like a good idea. It was 1988, long before you guys' time. If you look it up in the history of Irish, kind of recent Irish economic history, you'll see that 1988 was the second last Great Depression. So there were no jobs. And I was looking down the barrel at a career in secondary school teaching, which I didn't want to do. So I took a plane and went to Barcelona.
How did Barcelona end up being the trajectory?
Utterly by accident. I met a person who, I was running a language school for kids at the time in Dublin, and he was from Barcelona. He brought kids over every summer to Dublin. And he said to me, when you finish your degree, come over to Barcelona and work for me. And I liked him. We were friends. And I said, yeah, sure. So that was it. Myself and my then girlfriend got in the plane, went to Barcelona, and the rest was history.
The girlfriend came with you?
Of course.
But before we get into your whole career path, for anyone who doesn't know who you are or what you do, can you describe what it is that you do here at DBS?
At the moment?
Yeah.
Okay. I know your focus is on career.
Yeah.
And I think we've said off-piste that I think I've probably had 5 or 6 different careers so far. I'm 59 years of age. I still probably have another one left. But my current activity, should we say, at DBS is I'm a lecturer in film and creative media. So we have two undergraduate programs, level 7 BA and a level 8 BA in film and creative media. And we have a master's level 9, which we just started last September, also in the area of film and creative media. So across those programs, I teach a number of different courses, mostly to do with professional activity. So I teach professional practice, the creative workplace in first year. I teach professional practice, budgeting and scheduling. Sounds very boring, but it's really necessary in the third year group. And with the master's students, I'm teaching currently a course on contemporary industry practices.
Okay.
Okay, cool. But so you went to, just to go back on what you were saying, you finished your degree and then you just went straight to a country where you didn't speak the language.
I'd never didn't speak the language, but I had a job offer. And at 23, that was enough.
And how did that go? Just going somewhere?
Famously well. I got off.
Is that a irony?
I absolutely, no, I mean it. I loved it. I ended up spending 12 years in Barcelona.
Oh, really?
My 2 children were born there. Their first language was Catalan. Their second language is Spanish. Their third language is English. Spent until about the year 2000 in Barcelona. And then for a whole lot of family reasons, came back to live in Dublin. My kids went to secondary school then in Dublin during the early 2000s, and both went to university in Dublin. My daughter, who's now in her mid-30s, UCD degree, just like me. What does she do when she finishes her degree? Ups and goes back to Spain. So she's been living in Spain for the last 10 years as well, with my grandson and my nearly 10-year-old grandson, Mateo, on the island of Menorca, in the Balearic Islands, just about 20 minutes from Barcelona. So she's gone home, effectively. I get to go back as often as I possibly can, and that keeps my Spanish language skills going. And it continues the Dublin, Barcelona, Catalunya, Balearic Islands story going for us all.
I think it's really important for a student to travel, to take that time out.
Can't agree more.
I think a lot of people will have the stress of not going somewhere where they don't know the language. And I told you off camera, I'd gone to Paris, to Saint-Denis during COVID, and I knew no French. And I don't think it's as big of a barrier as you think it would be to not know the language. I think you pick it up as you're going a little bit.
Of course you do. Of course you do.
How long did it take you to learn the Spanish or the Catalonian language?
Well, initially Spanish, because at the time Catalan was coming through as the dominant language in the way that it is now in the Barcelona area. But back in 1988, this is way before all of that separatist and independentist conversation was very strong. So Spanish was the language of the street, and Spanish was the language that I learned. I think probably, I took it very seriously. I self-taught, I watched television all the time, I read the newspapers, I listened to the radio, I talked to anybody, anywhere, anytime. So I think probably about a year and a half, 2 years, I realised, okay, I've got it now.
2 years?
2 years full-time working there. At that stage, then I knew I had it in the bag. But lots of people struggle. And I think part of the struggle is not that they don't have language competence or capability. I think they struggle because they think they can't. And in my pre-notes to you, I said two things. Learn languages and travel as much as possible, as early as possible. I say that to all of our students. Get out and about. And we see that a lot with our international students. We have so many international students here, including Paddy. You're effectively an international student. That wealth of international experience gives us so much on the ground here. You should be out there doing the same thing in the way that you have been in lockdown in Saint-Denis.
I think it's also quite important for students to just spend some time away from home. I think a lot of our international students get that, but how important would you say that time is?
Critical.
Yeah.
Critical. I left home at 19 when I was in college. I mean, these were different times. It was cheap to rent. But I left home. I became independent, as it were, at the age of 19. And I think that's having spent, from 19 to 22 in college, but independent in Dublin, meant for me to go to Barcelona was no issue at all. I wasn't worried about having to pay the rent. I knew how to do that. I'd done that before. So I just added the language factor and the cultural factor. And for me, language and culture, when they're in the room, I'm in a happy place. So being 24/7 in another culture, in another language, is super added value.
Okay. And what would you say, if we disregard the whole language barrier thing, how was your experience moving to just a different country? Because we had Dr. Barnaby Taylor on last time, and he was saying even moving to Dublin, which is still an English-speaking country, he didn't have any friends coming over, and it was kind of hard still because you're moving to somewhere you don't know the culture, you don't know anyone. How is that experience?
That was fine for me because I'd already done it. I took a year out in college, a gap year, I suppose you'd call it now. We didn't call it a gap year then. We just said Conor disappeared for a year. And I went to France and I worked in a boarding school in the east of France near Strasbourg, earning minimum wage. But at least I had a roof over my head and 3 warm meals a day. And I loved it. So I always loved being away. The first time I ever went away, first time I left Ireland, I think it was probably 11 or 12, a family holiday in Europe. And once you get the bug, I was quite happy to go back. I remember the first time I went to Greece at about 19 in college, got off the plane in Crete and walking down the steps and thinking, there's something different here. What is it? It's the heat and the blaring light. And I thought to myself, do I really have to go home? Or can I not just stay here? Why not? All these people are living here, they're working here, they're functioning here, they're having families here, they're doing all of that normal stuff that we do. Yeah. You don't have to be in your home environment to do all the things that humans do. You can be anywhere, and humans throughout the history of humanity have moved. That's the common denominator. They're still doing it.
Yeah.
Would you suggest for students and just young people in general to first make sure they, like you, I guess, the first time you knew you had the job before going over, or just going over then figuring it out?
Well, no, of course it made a difference knowing I had a job going over. I don't know what it is to land in a place and have no clue of the language and no clue of anything else. I had my friend Luis and I had my job offer. Yeah. He said, when you get to Barcelona, call me within a week. And I did. And he said, yeah, great, we're starting on Monday. It was very loose, but I trusted him and it worked out. He's the godfather to my children. He's my oldest friend. 85 years of age, in retirement now. I'm going to see him in about 2 weeks' time.
Is he coming here?
No, I'm going over there.
You're going
I'm
over.
going over there. I go a lot. So, and that's a friendship that goes back almost 40 years now.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful thing. I wonder when you kind of, as a student, when you finish, you kind of trying to find your way, try to maybe get an office job, or I wonder when you translate to passion in projects, when would you say that phase came for you where you went from just trying to have a job to doing things you're passionate about?
Well, funny you should mention, because in that case, traveling was a passion. Learning languages was a passion. I'd been in France for a year, two years before that, and learned French very quickly. So having French meant it was much easier to learn Spanish. I think that should be said as well. Yeah. And languages were always a passion for me. So when you get languages and travel combined in one, then working is just a means to an end. And I used to say, listen, I'm living in Barcelona. I teach English, and that's a nasty habit that I do to feed my real habit, which is living in Barcelona.
Okay.
Yeah. No, sorry, go ahead.
I'm curious about, you've done so many projects.
Yes.
So many projects. I'm curious when you started to get the itch for creating your own thing.
Good question. I think in the first couple of years in Spain, I was really focused on feeding my young family. My kids were born there very early on, and you're building a career and you're doing the basics, as it were. But there were always sidebar events happening. Italian 90. I don't know if that means anything to you guys.
Sounds
Italian
familiar.
90 sounds familiar. That's the World Cup. It was held in Italy in 1990. It was the first time Ireland ever qualified for the World Cup. And I was living in Barcelona at the time. So somebody, bright spark, said, oh, Conor, he's Irish, get him to come in. And they ended up being on the panel of one of the TV shows, which was talking about Italian 90.
Right.
So I was into this, bright lights, studio, lights, camera, action, and I thought, oh, this is good. And then I did some radio work in Barcelona, then I got involved in translation. All the time I was teaching, all the time I was working regular, but adding on. So I think I got into the side hustle, project work as you call it. I call it side hustle. I think I got into the idea of side hustle very early on.
Okay.
You've traveled to so many countries to do a bunch of different jobs, completely different. Do you ever feel like you're leaving some progress in specific places behind, and that you're sort of starting over all the time if you keep moving around?
Well, no. I mean, I think if I look back on the CV, such as it is, there's a couple of distinct phases. The first phase is Spain, but in that phase, I settled down. I got married. I had 2 kids. I learned a language. I did my first master's in education by distance through the University of Sheffield in the mid-90s when I was working with 2 small kids at home. And then I moved into running the Erasmus program in the tourism faculty of one of the universities in Barcelona. So I did a lot of traveling then. And then in the year 2000, that phase ended and came back to Ireland. Spent a couple of years in language testing for the Education Testing Services, an American company. So I ran their Test of English for International Communication program and their TFI, Test de Français International, which was a beginning project here. And I ran that around the world. I did some testing in China, did some testing in Singapore, went to various conferences in America. So there was a lot of that. And then, ding dong, I turned 40. And at 40, I had what everyone has at 40, which is a midlife crisis. I said, you know what I really want to do? I really want to specialize in film. At that stage, I had done very little film work. I'd done some small project film work with friends of mine here in Dublin. When I came back and I directed a film in 2000, 2001, which showed at the Galway Film Festival, did some international festivals, a short film. But I went back to UCD at the age of 40 to do a full-time master's in screen production. And that turned very quickly into PhD studies in film, and that turned very quickly into teaching film. So the kind of teaching film, I taught in UCD, I taught at NCAD, and then I've been here at GBS since, 2009? It's hard to believe. I've been here for 15 years now. So that's kind of phase 3, if you like. Phase 1, Barcelona. Phase 2, initial Dublin. Phase 3, film. I have another 5 or 6 years to go before I retire, because I'm really old. And now I'm thinking, okay, so what's phase 4 going to be? Well, what's the coda going to be? To think about it in film terms.
Okay. you've mentioned that you were working on your masters while you were working part time while having two very small children. How do you manage that work-life balance with all your extra projects and having a wife and children and a master and work?
Just,
how do you do it?
Just breathe. Put one foot in front of the other and breathe. It'll be fine. You know, we live incredibly privileged lives. You two do, I have done, all of our students do. Anyone who can come to a college like this and spend a couple of years of the best years of their lives in full-time education. Even lots of people are working part-time, and things are hard out there at the moment in terms of cost of living. I appreciate that. But we are living in a very privileged way, in a very privileged place. So I don't have any time for people who say, oh, I'm too busy, oh, I'm too busy. No, breathe, move on, and do everything.
But with all your overlapping, because I know this is something I struggle with myself, is I have so many projects that overlap.
Yeah.
I just have to put some on the shelf for now and just...
Of course, you've got to prioritize, of course. But for me, and you, I know you're like me, you're one of these people, because I've been looking at you for the last couple of years thinking, how is this guy everywhere in DBS and everywhere else, no doubt. For me, the answer is always yes until it's no. And that mantra I've carried through all the way through Spain, back in Dublin, working in the academic world and working in the film world. I've spent many years working as a film producer as well. And it's a useful attribute on a film set to know when to say no. But it's particularly useful if you're the person who nearly always says yes.
I think it's such an easy thing to say, but it's actually quite a difficult task to be able to take on, because I think I struggle with saying no so much. And I end up spreading myself so thin that the quality drops sometimes.
You have to be careful. You have to be careful, but be very careful about when you say no as well, because shutting doors isn't a useful exercise.
Yeah.
Have you had very important, pivotal yeses in your life that you could remember at the top of your head?
Pivotal yeses that I've said or that people have said to me?
Either or, I suppose.
Definitely a pivotal yes. I mean, I think I mentioned this in my pre-notes to you guys. Pivotal moments in my life have generally been meeting people. I remember I met the guy who's a film director, a writer, and an academic now in the UK in Bournemouth University, James Fair. And James and I met in UCD in 2005. And within about 10 minutes of meeting, we established he just made a feature film. He was only 25 years of age. He just made a feature film. And I said, where have you screened it? He said, oh, we haven't screened it yet. I said, well, would you like me to screen it? And he said, yeah, sure. So I picked up the phone and called around, and we booked the Sugar Club on Leeson Street for the following, 10 days later or something like that. And we set about doing the world premiere of a new feature film made by an English person who was in Dublin. And it all happened on 5 minutes conversation. So there's lots of moments like that. I will say meeting my good friend Barney Taylor, who I know is a previous of yours on this show. Barney and I met at a film conference in Trinity in 2007. And within 5 minutes, you just know this person is an ally for life. And about 3 years later, Barney rang me and said, come to DBS, we have an opening for a full-time film studies lecturer. So there's been a couple of people like that I've met in different phases. A very good friend of mine who was the former CEO of Filmbase down in the Temple Bar, sadly no longer with us, Filmbase, but Alan still is. But I remember when I met Alan, and he was the first AD on the short film that I made back in 2000, 2001. I didn't know him from a hole in the wall, but we struck it off. He worked for 3 or 4 days on the short film, and we've worked on and off executively producing feature films for the last 15 years. I think we've put together 8 feature films, a ton of other projects. We ran a master's program together. We graduated 120 students with an MA in digital feature film production over 6 years. So it's those moments, and they don't happen very often, but when they do, you need to be aware.
Okay.
Obviously, you've done so many projects. If we went through them all, we'd be here for hours. But I'm curious, what would be the ones that stood out for you? Maybe the ones that were the most complex or the ones that meant the most?
Some of the ones that I'm most proud of are the ones that have lasted. I think I did mention, my children are my most, my proudest project. And they're still going. And
Interesting term to use for people.
yeah, well, no, it's all ahead of you guys. You know, family is a project as well.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely the project that I'm most proud of. There's a couple of film projects. We made a film in 2015 called Poison Pen, which was written by Owen Colfer. I don't know if you're familiar with Owen Colfer, famous Irish writer of the YA genre. Artemis Fowl.
Okay.
He wrote all the Artemis Fowl books. And hugely successful international writer. I think he sold 30 million copies of his books around the world. He's much bigger in America and around the world than he is here. But Owen was very generous, and he gave us a script for a film that he'd written a couple of years previously called Poison Pen. We made that film in Film Base with some graduate students on a shoestring budget. You know, probably cost 60 or 70,000 euros to make a full-length feature film, which is now on Amazon Prime and has been watched around the world. Has been at film festivals in Chicago and Sydney and Rome. So I'm very proud of those kinds of projects because they still stand. And every couple of years, I sit down for 5 minutes and I pull up Amazon Prime and I look at Poison Pen and I go, okay, it's still okay. And that's 10 years ago. So there's a couple of films like that I'm very, very proud of in terms of my project work.
Do you ever celebrate your successes? I find sometimes when things go well, I just on to the next thing, and I think it's important to reflect sometimes and realise.
I do. I very much celebrate them at the time. You know, don't be around me at a rap party. I'm celebrating big time. But I also, I suppose, in this kind of phase 3 as a film lecturer, I spend a lot of time talking about film, and my examples very often are my experience. So I get a big kick when I show a trailer for Poison Pen to my first year students, for example. And they're going, wow. It's real. Well, I'm not in the picture, but I'm in the credits. You know, it's real. Wow, they were in London shooting that. Wow, that's Big Ben. It's in that picture. It's on Amazon Prime. I can rent it for $2.99. And now this guy is talking to me, telling me about film production. So maybe I'm going to listen a bit harder. So in a sense, the work of 15 years ago stays with me now as examples of what it is people can do. Keep going. The other thing I'm really proud of, and I'm glad you asked me, are former students. I've got some former students.
I get that.
I've got some former students in the last 15 years, DBS and film-based, and sometimes both, who have gone on to have fantastic careers. And I take the kind of pride in them that their parents probably don't even take, because I know me and Barney and Claire and Matt and the team here were part of nurturing that talent. So finding talent at 18, 19, 20 and seeing it develop. I don't take the credit for their work, but I take great pleasure in looking at their work and seeing how well they've done.
And can I ask, for the feature films you did, where do you find how do you collect the funds for big creative projects like that?
We specialized in what you would call low to no budget feature film making. Now, of course, there's not no budget because there's a huge amount of time and resource involved. But where you're dealing with a cast and a crew of 35 or 40 or 50 people over 3 week shoot, so that's 18 days, 6 days a week for 3 weeks, there is a certain amount of crowdfunding. And we pioneered crowdfunding in Irish independent feature film back in the 2012, 2013, 2014 period. No one was doing it. We started doing it. We did quite well in the original days. So we would very often crowdfund 20 or 30,000 euros worth of cash. We would attach money from the organisation to it as well. And then the student body would bring in money of their own. And then on top of that, you're begging, borrowing and stealing resources, camera, locations, transport, absolutely everything you can think about. You're being super creative on the hoof. When I look at Poison Pen now, and I've watched it with many, many people over the years, often I ask them, so what do you think it cost? And they'll watch the film in its entirety and they'll say, well, it's definitely not less than 1.5 million. I wish. We made that film for 65,000 euros. So it's, I wouldn't get too hung up on budget. You can find enough money to make a feature film. People are making feature films on Apple phones now. It's about planning and getting the resources together, however limited they are.
I think especially today, like I'm sure back in that time it might be much harder for you, but there's so many options these days,
Yeah, it wasn't that hard.
and everything's cost effective
Yeah.
for the most part.
But
I think you've got to be creative.
Yeah.
That's it. Creative. You know, I consider myself a creative producer, not because I was the director or the writer or the actor, but because I was frantically producing this film under a severe duress. But that's the joy of it.
But your passion for filmmaking, you found that passion only when you were 40 years old?
No,
Or?
I always had it. I just didn't have an outlet for it.
Okay.
I didn't have an outlet. If I could have done the course that I'm teaching now in DBS at the age of 18, I would have bitten their hand off to do it. But it wasn't around. It didn't exist.
So you've always had this passion?
Always. I was always really, really interested in film as a narrative device. I loved film from as a kid. My father used to bring me to the cinema when I was 7 or 8 or 9. I remember those films that I saw, Disney cartoons or The Towering Inferno or the Poseidon Adventure. You know, films that he wanted to see on a Saturday afternoon, and we'd pile in the back of the car and go and see them with him.
Yeah.
And that's me at 7, 8, 9, 10, realizing, wow, big screen, big world, big adventure. So that's always been with me. I just never really got a chance to do it until I was 40.
Yeah. And the first half of your career then was mostly focused on the languages and...
Well, exactly, on living in Spain, working in Spain, traveling around, building a career, doing the first masters, developing a career, and you know, being the father of 2 young children. As a relatively young father myself, that was quite enough. There was a lot going on.
And did you postpone your dream of becoming a filmmaker, or did you...
I never really had a dream of becoming a filmmaker. My dream was, in as much as it was a dream at all, was just to be involved in that world.
Yeah.
And at the time when I was living in Spain, I had lots of friends in Ireland who were starting to work because the Irish film industry really kicked off in the 90s. And in the 90s, I was in Barcelona. So a couple of my friends who are now established filmmakers in Ireland, I would see them only once a year at the Cannes Film Festival. So I'd go up to Cannes for the film festival in May. They'd be there with their films. Another friend of mine was working with the Irish Film Board at the time. And that was my sort of introduction into that film world. I'd just be the hanger-on at the Cannes Film Festival while my mates were showing their films. But I realised, yeah, okay, this is good. I want to be involved in this. I never thought I'd be a film lecturer. That made sense when I was 40, 41. And that's allowed me carry the passion on.
What's lecturing like? Do you
I
enjoy
love it.
Yeah, I was gonna say you either love it or you hate it.
Oh no, totally
And you
love
strike
it.
with someone who likes.
No, I love it. I'm a vampire. I live off the energy of my students, and that's, you know, I've been doing that now for almost 20 years, and I've probably another 5 or 6 years to go.
Is there anything that ever infuriates you about lecturing?
No, the holidays are great. The money is terrible, but hey, the holidays are great, and the students, the energy from the students, I would not give that up. That's what I get up in the morning for. That's what gets me in class 5 minutes before the students, because I love that. I love that energy, and I wouldn't give that up at all.
Do you have any idea what you want to do next? Or do you think it's just going to hit you in the face one day?
There's a bunch of things I have been doing on and off over the years. I was the editor of Studies in Arts and Humanities from 2015, which is an online academic journal, which we ran here. A couple of colleagues from the library and some academic colleagues as well, and we ran 12 issues of it. sahjournal.com. It's open to air, open access journal. Academic work, but also general work and lots of artwork, lots of poetry, some films, some experimental films, and interviews with artists. So I'm really interested in publishing, because that's changed a lot in the last while. And I think I would like to spend a little more time over the next few years having publishing, online publishing and open access publishing as a thing I develop, yeah.
The world's obviously it's gearing quite towards media these days. Do you ever think you'll take on some
Media. Everything is media. You know, when I talk to my films, when I started teaching film 20 years ago, it was all about film history, film theory, and a certain amount of old school film production. Nowadays, I mean, here I am doing a video cast with 2 guys who aren't film students.
Yeah.
Everyone is doing media now. And some of my, I mean, I talked about some of my graduates, some of my students over the last years, who are working as producers or directors or writers or production managers, but there's lots of them doing things which have nothing to do with film. Like the guy who runs video communications for Ryanair is a graduate of ours. So all of those Ryanair short videos you see
Ryanair
on
quite good
Instagram,
too.
they're very good. And Chris Harris runs all of that, and he's a graduate of ours at DBS. There's another guy who was a graduate of mine from Filmbase, who is the head of internal video at Paddy Power. You're thinking, Paddy Power, internal video, what does that mean? Paddy Power employ 14,000 people across the world, and for them, video is the best way to communicate. They don't send each other videos, or they don't send each other emails, they send each other videos. And he's the head of internal video. He thought he was going to be a film director. He is a kind of a film director, but he's making short videos for internal communications for Paddy Power. And there are lots of other examples like that. So a lot of my students today, we have 95 or 100 film students at DBS at the moment. A huge number of them are not going to work in film at all. Not going to work in film, they're not going to work in television, they're going to work in creative media, and they're going to work in creative media in the corporate sector.
Yeah.
Because that's where the growth area is. It isn't any less creative. It's just different.
It seemed like you always knew what you wanted to do, but was there any moment where it was just a blind leap of faith where you're like, I'll do this for now and figure it out after? Or
Yeah, most of the time.
Most of the time you didn't know?
Most of the time. Going to Barcelona was a blind leap of faith. Coming back to Dublin was a blind leap of faith. Starting at going back to UCD and doing the postgraduate work in film was a blind leap of faith. Making the first feature film, we made a feature film. It's an insane story when I think of it now. In 2008, James Fair, the person I mentioned before, and I decided, as a result of a drunken bet, in a bar around the corner in the Hairy Lemon, we sat down, had a drink, and he was telling me about this new camera he had. It was this Panasonic P2 with a digital camera with particular kind of hard drive that you could shoot 17 minutes of raw footage, high definition, 1080 at the time. So this is 2007. 17 minutes, and he was very excited about it. No cartridge change, just one SD drive, 17 minutes, amazing. I said, how long would it take you to make a feature film? And he said, well, technically you can make a feature film if you just backed it up and kept the digital image technician thing rotating all the time. And he said, I don't know, probably 5 days. I said, wow, could you do it in 3? And he went, 3. And we worked it out, that would be 72 hours. So we thought, wouldn't it be a fun thing to make a feature film in 72 hours? So we would shoot, edit, and screen a feature film in 72 hours. Okay, that'd be fun. How about if we did it in a film festival, during a film festival, when everybody in the Irish film industry is there? So we talked the director of the Galway Film Fleadh into allowing us to do it at the Galway Film Fleadh in 2008. She said, I remember vividly the meeting, she said, yeah, you can do it. And I said, but Miriam, will you screen it? And she says, I'll screen it if it's feckin' watchable. And she did. So we literally pressed the red button on a Thursday morning, and we screened in the Town Hall Theatre in Galway in front of 400 people on the Sunday night. Full-length feature
That's
film.
crazy.
Now, we rehearsed it, we scripted it, we rehearsed it, we had everything planned, but we shot, edit, and we did the edit during the shoot as well, and screened it in 3 days. 72-hour film.
Jesus.
That's crazy.
So that was madness.
Yeah.
And that was spur-of-the-moment stuff too.
And do you equate like most of your career to dreaming as big as you can and then?
Yeah, or responding quickly.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's, dreaming as big as you can, making a feature film for Galway Film Fleadh is not like dreaming I want to win an Oscar or I want, a $1 billion box office film. It's relatively doable. I know how to get to Galway. I know some people. We can physically do that. It's not difficult. But I think it's the responding. And it's that idea I mentioned earlier on of the answer is yes until it's no. And there were a bunch of times during that process where I was producing and going, no, that's not going to happen. No, we're not going to do it that way. Find me a better way. But yes, yes, yes until it's no. Does that make sense?
That's
Yeah.
a great answer.
I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I think we've been something similar. I think we've took on a few projects and it's always just off a random conversation where we're like, oh, okay, let's just go attack it.
That's it.
And I think a lot of students have really bright ideas, but it's the action that they don't follow through on. That's where things die, I feel like.
Totally. And waiting for the right moment, or waiting for the right people, or waiting for the man to tell you that it's okay to do it, you waste your time.
Yeah, we recorded a project last year and we were meant to do one rehearsal and say we filmed 5 people in one day and used that as content. But that wasn't meant to be how it was. But if we had overthought that, it wouldn't have worked.
Exactly. I think spontaneity is greatly undervalued.
Yeah.
Particularly here at higher education and third level, where everything is structured. And it's week 1, week 2, week 3, semester 1, semester 2, assignment on this date, through Moodle. All of that's fine, but there needs to be space for spontaneity as well.
It seems like you've been doing the fake it till you make it motto. Have you been doing that as
No,
where you're like...
No, because I don't regard it as a faking thing at all. It's do it till you make it.
Okay.
There's no faking it. I'm not putting it on.
You're trying, just doing your best.
Yeah, of course. Well, if you're not doing your best, there's no point in doing it.
Yeah.
So just doing it. It's that Nike motto. Just do it.
Has
Just
there ever
make your
been
film.
a moment where you were like, okay, this is tough, this is like really extreme right now? Like where you're under great stress?
I won't get into stress. I mean, this is a family program. You don't want to know.
Allegedly.
You don't want to know
yet.
how stressful I have had it at some stages, particularly during that film in Galway. Trust me, you couldn't begin to imagine the level of stress that I went through for that film, and I'm still incredibly proud of the film.
Yeah.
And the cost to me, financially and in all that other way, that's fine. But emotional cost, almost devastating. But I'm still looking back into that, as a 2008 thing, thinking, hell, I'm glad we did that.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. So yeah, if you can pick it up and move on, one foot in front of the other, keep breathing, you've survived.
I think it's important not to look too far ahead.
No.
Just look at what's next, and you'll be okay.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
I feel
if you're focused. Tell me.
I feel like you've had a completely opposite career path to our last guest, Barnaby Taylor, where at the start, because at the start he was completely lost and he just did a regular job for a while until he found.
Yeah.
But you kind of went everywhere and then figured it out, as opposed to him, he just stayed until he figured it out.
People have different paths. One of the things, again, back to the notes that we talked to prior to recording this, was that career isn't linear. It never will be. It never has been. It never will be. And even less likely to be into the future. Nobody's career is linear. Mine isn't, and I'm still going. Yours won't be. Your college career has already not been linear. Am I right? So this constant career path fiction, that's a fake. That's not true. Even when people pretend it's true, it isn't. That's just not the way the real world works.
I think that's really good advice for maybe fallen years right now who don't know what to do. They know they're about to get a degree and they don't know what they're going to do with it.
That's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. It's very unusual. I mean, people who are studying accounting, well, they know they have to do ACA exams or steps up. People who are studying law will have to do FCs. Everybody in those areas, in those professions, has a particular trajectory. But there's nobody coming off a degree in marketing who knows what's going to happen to them next June. There's nobody coming off a degree in film who knows what's going to happen to them next June. It's entirely up to them. Excuse me. Entirely up to them.
And what advice would you give to a student who's maybe stressed out about it? Like, what do you think is a step forward for them to maybe reassure themselves?
Yeah, exactly. Realize where you are. If you're unhappy about a non-linear career path, well, then find a set of study objectives that will bring you on a linear career path. But don't expect a degree in film to catapult you into a director's chair in Ardmore Studios in 6 months' time. That's not the way it works.
I think I've always said that to the students, that when you finish with your degree, that's a wonderful thing, but so have maybe 10,000 other people. Yeah. It's going to be the creative part that you do that kind of sets you apart. And
of course,
whatever you take on as your own, that's going to be what sets you apart from everybody else.
And that's not to devalue the degree at all, because the degree is
100%.
Utterly essential. Having
100%.
a degree nowadays in 2015 or 2025 is the equivalent of having a leaving certificate 20 years ago. And in fact, the equivalent of having a degree now is having a master's. which is why there are so many master's programs available. So keep studying, keep adding, keep learning more skills, add languages, add professional skills, add creative skills. You know, you guys are not film students, but you know how to edit, you know how to shoot, you know how to light, you know how to do things that are not part of your official skill set, depending on your college diploma. This is a good thing, and not just a good thing, but an absolutely normal thing going forward.
I think there's a lot of people, young people, that don't know what they want to do, and they don't have that drive because they haven't found that passion yet. So do you have any words of wisdom for, do you think they should just travel more, try more things?
I think they should travel, I think they should learn languages, and I think they should have the drive without the clarity of what that drive is about. Because if you can bring the drive to the table, and that drive then becomes the movable feast. Don't wait for the passion to come to you. Don't wait for somebody to offer you the perfect opportunity. That doesn't happen. Drive out there and you'll find things that work. They won't fall your way, but you have a much better chance if you're out looking for it than if you're sitting at home waiting for it to happen.
That was a great answer.
Thank you.
I think we're getting close to the end, so before we leave, is there anything you'd like to promote or say to anyone watching?
No, nothing at all, except watch these two guys, because they're stars of the future. So I look forward to seeing where you guys go in 10 years' time, and I will take pride in that too.
And we have this habit or this routine thing. I forgot the word.
Tradition.
Tradition is the word of every podcast. We ask the previous guest a question that they can ask for the next guest. So Barnaby Taylor has asked you, what makes you happy?
And I would say peace.
I hear you.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Well, cool. And do you have a question for him for the next guest? Sorry.
For the next guest, I do, and I'm glad you gave me some advance warning on that. I do. I'm gonna ask 2 questions for the price of 1.
Okay.
And it's to ask him, what's the best thing about working at DBS, and what's the worst thing about working at DBS?
I feel like we're getting in some territory.
I like that. I want to get people in trouble.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Great to talk to you guys, and please keep up what you're doing. You're an inspiration to us all, particularly in the film and media department. We're looking at non-film and media students doing what our film and media students should be doing. So keep it up. You're doing great.
Thank you so much, Conor.
Thank you so much, Conor.
Thank you.
And we'll see you guys next time.